So while it's true that Trump is the man most responsible for the attempted coup, and I don't think there's any question, he's the man most responsible for what followed next, as my next guest has been warning for years, the corrupt people the ex-president surrounds himself with are culpable as well. Congressman Adam Schiff is a Democrat of California. He sits on the January 6th committee. He's chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and he joins me now. Congressman, it's good to have you. I wonder, as we read through the report and we look at Meadows' role, how you understand his role and his culpability in the scheme.
Well, I think the reason why Meadows had some staying power in the Trump administration is that he would go along with what the president wanted. But he also had the habit of basically telling people what they wanted to hear. And so you see in those text messages and in other witness testimony that he would tell one person that, well, the president, he's going to recognize he needs to step aside. The election is over. But then he would tell someone else something very different. And of course, he would facilitate schemes of the former president, the most serious of which was the one you mentioned, in which he was trying to help install Jeffrey Clark, this unethical and unqualified lawyer at the Justice Department, as the new acting attorney general, so that Clark would do what Barr wouldn't do, what Rosen wouldn't do, and that is lie about the election and get states to try to reverse the results. So my experience with him in Congress was he was an affable fellow, but ultimately had no moral compass and would do whatever he needed to do to advance. And he certainly found a way to advance within the Trump administration.
What do you think? I mean, Meadows is a great example of this question of what is to become of these individuals, right? And it's a question that the committee's report prompts. I mean, in the case of Donald Trump, there are criminal referrals. You have an op-ed talking about what comes after the report. But there's also this broader question about, I guess, disgrace or repudiation or rejection or, political exile. Like, what do you think should become of Mark Meadows? What do you think should become of Rudy Giuliani? What do you think should become of John Eastman? All the individuals that did facilitate this assault on the U.S. constitutional order.
Well, those that broke the law should be prosecuted. And I hope that the Justice Department will track down all the leads that we have provided. And where they feel there's evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, they won't hesitate to indict some of these enablers of this crime against our democracy. Others for which there may not be sufficient evidence to prosecute, I hope that they will be tarred by their association with Donald Trump, by their participation in his scheming, that they will not be invited back into respectable society when they work to subvert our democracy. I hate to see, some of the early people who left the Trump administration simply under disgrace rehabilitated, either in the media or elsewhere. And of course, many of these folks sought through our investigation to rehabilitate themselves. To give you one prominent example, look, I'm glad that Bill Barr finally found a line he wouldn't cross, but he crossed so many lines before he got there. This was somebody who intervened to reduce the sentence and dismiss cases against people who were pleading guilty or convicted of lying to Congress or lying to investigators to help cover up for themselves and for the former president. Bill Barr used the department to weaponize it against the president's perceived enemies. These folks, yes, some of them did the right thing at the very end, but only at the very end. And we shouldn't forget that. And certainly where there's no taking of responsibility, we shouldn't forgive that either.
One thing I wanted to talk to you about is a kind of quantification that emerges over the course of this long report of the sheer implacability of the efforts to do this. And I think even at the time, in real time, we all saw it play out. We saw the president spread the big lie. We saw his tweets. We saw his speaking appearances afterwards. There was this really persistent sense, and I think it endured even afterwards, that this was essentially a temper tantrum, that this was someone who was unable to, grapple with the fact that he was a loser, that he had lost this election, and was, in his kind of classically unregulated way, acting out. And I think that's a really important misperception that is corrected by the committee's report. The committee reports at least 200 attempts by Trump and allies to pressure states to overturn results. 68 meetings, attempted or connected phone calls or text messages, each aimed at one or more state or local officials. 18 instances of prominent public remarks, language targeting one or more such officials. 125 social media posts by President Trump or senior aides targeting one or more such officials, either explicitly or implicitly, and mostly from his own account. Do you think the correct understanding of the focus of Donald Trump on this outcome has gotten through to the public that appears in the report?
I do think it has. I think we've reached the folks that we could reach. You know, people that live in Fox world and don't get exposed to any other information than the misinformation they get on Fox, we're not going to reach. But those who have an open mind, I think we have reached, and we've demonstrated just how culpable the former president was in every step of this scheme. You know, you're right. There are some who would belittle his misconduct by saying, well, you know, he's acting like a petulant child, or he doesn't know the better. He's a non-traditional politician. This is just trumping Trump. Well, you know, that might have worked in the very beginning when he was breaking down norm after norm. People maintained it even when he sought Russia's help in his first election and lied about it to cover it up. They excused it and said it was just trumping Trump when he tried to extort President Zelensky by withholding military aid to get him to help him smear his opponent in his next election. And even now, there's an attempt by some to minimize his incitement of a violent attack on our democracy and his persistent efforts through multiple lines of effort to overturn the election. There's no excusing any of that. You can't excuse it by saying that he's, you know, an immature, petulant child. You can't excuse it by saying that he has a mental health problem, although he probably does. The man was the president of the United States. And as you mentioned at the outset, he was only able to get away with what he did because so many people excused his behavior because it advanced their careers. People like Mark Meadows, people like Jim Jordan, people like Kevin McCarthy, and Mitch McConnell, who all understood exactly the danger that Donald Trump posed, but standing up to him was not as important as the position they held or the one they wanted.
Final question for you. News today that the committee, which is about to end, we imagine, rescinded formally the subpoena it issued to the former president. Why did you do that?
Well, because we have several outstanding subpoenas which we had to withdraw because there was no time to enforce them. And the concern we had, frankly, going into the new Congress was, number one, they wouldn't be effective. But if the new majority in the House took over the litigation, they might make concessions that are not in the interest of the House of Representatives, but they believe were in Donald Trump's interest. And we didn't want to see them sacrifice another institutional interest of our democracy to curry favor with the former president. So we withdrew them. But, you know, this gets to another point you were making, and that is the recommendations in our report for reform. It's not going to be enough to prosecute people. It's not going to be enough to expose their misconduct. There also has to be reform. And one of the most important reforms is new legislation that would expedite enforcement of congressional subpoenas so that Congress is once again a co-equal branch of government, fully capable of enforcing its oversight. If people like Donald Trump can prove that Congress is a paper tiger by simply waiting us out, as they did with this subpoena and others, and if the courts are, you know, unwilling to expedite because they don't want to or they move slowly, then we need to force them to resolution. This, I think, is among the most important reforms to restore our system of checks and balances.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.